Hi, and welcome to another edition of PEP Business TV.
So today we're going to be talking about appraisal and valuation. Often a contentious part of the sales process, one where we can lose the customer very easily, and I think perhaps probably very influential in terms of the customer making the purchase decision. So I guess the question we've got to ask, Mike, is are we good at appraisal in the motor industry?
Well, probably not. I think the best we could hope for is that we're inconsistent. I mean, some people do it very well, some people just absolutely don't. I've certainly had a vehicle of mine appraised by somebody looking through a window and believing they could understand enough by seeing half of it from 50 yards away.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is often we get mixed up between appraisal and valuation. And
Yeah.
you know, just as you've said, you've had your car valued through the window. Someone's offered me a price for my car without looking at it at all, just taking a valuation from a guide.
And the truth is, we tend to not train it as a skill. It's something that people learn on the job from somebody else. It gets passed along. And it doesn't really have a clearly defined process for so many. It just is something that happens as part of what they're expected to do, but they're not really shown how to do it correctly.
Sure. And I think the other thing that's probably worth pointing out at this stage is that with any sales operation, there are different personalities within the department, and getting some sort of consistency so everyone's doing it the same way has to help in terms of, if you like, the stock that then arrives in by way of trading.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's no doubt about it, as with all these situations, those that do it well are far more successful in progressing with the sales process.
Yeah, for sure. I think what we tend to find is that there are some people who are really good at it, and there are others perhaps that need a little bit of help. So perhaps this might just help those that need that little bit of a nudge along.
Sure.
Do we think then that we should be trained to appraise?
Well, for me, it's like any other skill. A skill is something that can be trained and learned, and therefore the more that you understand it and the better you're trained in how to do it, the better you are when it comes to actually performing it. So absolutely it should be trained. This is one of the great problems in our industry, is that we don't tend to give people the help to understand how to go through that process. We just give them, sometimes a blank piece of paper and say, go and have a look around the car. It's not as good as it should be, certainly.
One of the things that, one of the questions that we've had come in from regarding this particular topic is, when is the right time to conduct an appraisal?
Yeah. Well, we've talked about this, you and I, many times, because it varies, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Some people have an opinion that said it should be done almost right
Straight
at the
away.
beginning, so that you know what you're working with. Others will say, leave it until you've got somebody interested in a product. It's a varying answer, I think, isn't it? All sorts of different approaches to that, and I suppose it's like everything else. It's what fits you and what fits your process, and sometimes the way you feel it should be done. So maybe there's not really a right answer. I don't know.
No, I would agree with you. I think sometimes you'll have people arrive that need to understand what their car's worth before they can determine what the vehicle is that they're going to be able to afford to buy.
Yeah, and then if we look at one of the other questions that's come that follows that, where people say, should the customer be with me when the appraisal takes place? Well.
Yeah.
You and I have both been through this process where you're either left with a cup of coffee on your own while they go and look at it, or what happened to you? Someone drove your car off and never even asked if they could take it.
Yeah, and you know how precious I am about my car.
Absolutely. Well, why not? So, should the customer be with you or not? Well, what's our view on that?
Well, definitely, because I think it enables you to have the opportunity to build a rapport.
Absolutely.
You start to understand what the customers are going to be using the car for. You see things on their existing car that they may want on their next car. So all of this gives you a lead into making sure that they offer the right product.
And they tell you things. If you look at something and say, I'll tell you what happened there, or the tow bar's on because we use it for this. And it's that whole learning. It's an extended part of qualification, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
So it's a hugely important part of it.
Again, one of the questions that we've had come in, again, related to this specific topic is, what do we do if there's obvious damage on the car?
Yeah. And you see that. I mean, sometimes if it's obvious damage, it's staring at you.
Yeah.
It's the smaller things, I think, that are interesting. And we've often said that if you just run your finger across a small scratch, or you just put your hand on a dint, it's enough quite often for the customer to tell you what happened, isn't it? I hit the gate post a couple of weeks ago and that's what happened. But that's probably a better way than challenging the customer to say, "Oh, I see you've got some damage on the front wing."
Yeah.
It's one of those things that's.
I think even if nothing gets said, it enables you to be able to demonstrate to the customer that you've seen the fact that there is some damage there. We don't need to be critical of it. It's just a question of letting them know that we've seen it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And obviously that will affect the valuation, won't it?
Of course, but it's part of this, and I think it picks up on one of these next questions about us being open and transparent in what we're doing, because we have a question that came in and said, how do I make sure I get a fair price and that the customer is satisfied with it? And this issue of being, do I have the customer with me or not? If they're with you, they see what happens. They see your process.
So it's a justification,
Absolutely.
really, isn't it?
And well, they can follow what you've done, and instead of it just being a magical priced-in valuation at the end, they've been part of you appraising the vehicle and seeing what's been done to get to that sort of final price.
Sure. And I think one of the other things to share at this stage is, we touched on earlier that valuation and appraisal are two different things. But in reality, you can't have one without the other.
No,
you can't present a valuation without having done a detailed appraisal.
And that detail word's important, isn't it? Because how often do we see people go out with a pre-presented form that's then not complete?
Oh,
and they go to a sales manager
Yeah.
and say, I've had a look at that, and there's half the information's missing.
Absolutely.
So,
And I think the other thing that's worth putting in there is that, in terms of presenting the valuation, we're going to arrive at a cost price for the car. We're going to arrive at what we believe it's worth in the market.
Yeah.
And we can share that with the customer, which breaks down some of the barriers in the negotiation in terms of it provides a starting point.
Well, that picks up on one of the next questions we've had from people that said, well, how do I present the price if it's then lower than the customer expects, which inevitably seems to be the problem. Customers' expectations are always perhaps higher than we see the reality.
I think controversially, Mike, one of the things I firmly believe in is the fact that we shouldn't ask the customer what they want for the car. I think that it just really invites a problem for us to challenge. At the end of the day, we're the experts. We should know what the car's worth.
Yeah. And I think there's those issues where we actually say, this is the value of the car in the market, but it doesn't necessarily have to say that this is what we're offering you. What we're saying is this is what the car's worth right now today, and this will be part of our process for getting towards a price. So there's two different things, really.
Well, I think invariably that there is an element of negotiation, and that market price is the starting point for that negotiation.
Absolutely.
And whilst we don't want it to be an area of conflict, you've got to start somewhere, and it's better off starting with you in control rather than trying to reach an artificially high figure. Let's face it, we all have a perception of the value of our own things, which is probably beyond the bounds of reality.
Absolutely. Well, what we've done with this is we've tried to look at how many steps or key sections there might be that would cover the appraisal and valuation process. Ian, do you want to just go through the 5-step titles just so that we can at least be sure we've got them covered?
So the 5 topic headings are the purpose and function of a trade-in appraisal, understanding what the customer expects, a critical element of the process, how to carry out a thorough and accurate appraisal, which obviously will enable you to present an offer, establishing the market value, and then presenting the offer. If you follow the link through to the training course, you'll find an awful lot of support materials there that will enable you to become a master in this critical area.
An interesting and complex topic for us to look at there. And the details covered in our training platform. So follow the link through and see how we can help you become a real pro at this very difficult subject of appraisal and valuation. Also, you'll find a free download that will give you access to an appraisal document if you don't have one of those.
So I hope you've enjoyed this, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks for joining us.